Have any of you ever had a mountaintop experience? I can imagine what that might mean. Something like, before I die, the Vikings would win the Super Bowl, you know. I'm hopeful for the Timberwolves, however. Maybe I should explain what I mean by a mountaintop experience. Mountaintop experiences are moments in our lives when we feel profound wonder. Moments either of great joy or sometimes of overwhelming sadness. These moments change us. When we try to explain them to others, we have great difficulty because they affect us so deeply, words fail us. Moments which make us realize that there is something greater in the universe than just us, and because of that, we want to be better people. These moments are outside of our control. We cannot manufacture them. They surprise us when we least expect them. And these moments are fleeting. As soon as they are gone, we long for them to return. My parents immigrated to the United States after World War II to Eastern Washington, to be exact. They were refugees. They wanted, as my dad said, to put the horrors out of his mind. He didn't want to be in a country where he had seen so much bloodshed. So my dad became a carpenter, moved from job to job. My mom cleaned the local clinic as a janitor. We didn't have much, but we had enough. At a young age, I decided to start working to kind of help out the family. I worked for a local farmer. I rose at 4 a.m. before school, and with a few of my buddies, we went out to the fields to move irrigation pipes. At 7:30, we were home, and I would rush off to school. I remember those mornings as being magical. We worked alone. I was dropped off in a field, and then my friends went off to other fields. We started out when it was pitch dark, and we picked up 60-foot-long, 3-inch aluminum pipes with a sprinkler head on one end. We walked about 30 paces, carrying it, and then hooked it up to the previous one, 33 pipes in a line, to irrigate the next section of field. One morning stands out to me from those times. Out of the darkness, the sun reached over the hill like with golden fingers of light, pushing their way through dark green locks of tall, swaying spring wheat. As I walked through the low-lying trough, a soft silver fog flowed up forth around me, just engulfing me. As I turned with one pipe toward the last gloom of the night, looking towards the west, the barely risen sun broke behind me, and a rainbow billowed before me and went up to the heavens. It seems almost as if I was standing in the rainbow rather than seeing the rainbow. It was so brilliantly thick that I dared to do this. I reached out, and I actually touched it. Now, I know it makes no sense, and my words do not do it justice, but that's the best I can do to explain it. I stood there as the rainbow began to swirl in the light of the wind. Slowly, the vapors around me drifted skyward, and the spiraling breezes, shimmering arches of light and rainbows, slowly vanished. And I can only explain my experience after that as that I felt terribly lonely. I was 13. And if I close my eyes today, over 50 years later, much more than 50 years later, I can still behold the foggy sunrise, the waist-high swaying sea of green spring wheat, and the dreamlike mist-born rainbow. I felt small and at peace, joyous and full of sadness, full and empty, both at the same time, because I longed to see that beauty again. To be honest, I still do. The ancient Celts of Ireland appreciated wondrous beauty. especially the beauty that's in Ireland, if you've ever had the chance to be there. Ireland is still called the land of rainbows to this day. I've been fortunate to take students there as a professor of religion on a number of occasions. Whenever I see rainbows, whether there or here, there's something of that rainbow I saw when I was 13 in all of them. And the Celts believed that natural beauty, the beauty of this world, is what gives us wonder. As a pastor and a professor, I have often heard parishioners of students tell me that, or parishioners of students tell me that I would rather be out fishing on a Sunday morning as the sun's rising than sitting in a church pew because I feel closer to God there. I get that feeling. I completely understand. And so did the Celts. And the Celts called these moments of wonder that we experience in our lives thin places. Such places are thin, said the Celts, because they are those spots where the veil between our world and heaven seems very thin. Almost as if we can reach from this world into heaven at that moment, like I did that morning when I touched the rainbow. Beauty reminds us how the world is meant to be, and we ache because it's not that way. Beauty is nothing less than creation reflecting the Creator that made it. How can we not be moved by beauty because in it we see God, or at the very least we see God's handiwork, which points to God. As a youth in that field, I really think my longing for the beauty is a longing for things to be right. Have you ever had such an experience? For 30 years, I was a professor at Concordia, and I usually ask this question of my students in all my classes. When I asked them, most of them said yes, but some of them would say, well, I'm not so sure. But then when we started explaining it, they all go, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember that moment. I suspect the same is true for all of us. If we're fortunate enough, we have traveled to some place of great beauty, like the Grand Canyon, standing on its edge. And if you have, right now in your mind, you can feel that wonder with you, right? You may have been to Hawaii, just seeing the lush beauty of that place. Maybe someplace in Europe, the Rocky Mountains, or if you're like me, the lakes around here do it to me every day. Have you ever noticed how that when you're caught up in beauty, the Celts say not only does the place become thin, but time itself becomes thick. And what they mean by that is time slows if it does not stop in moments of wonder. When I held our newborn sons and daughters in my arms for the first time, right after they were born, I held wonder. And time stopped. Nothing mattered in that moment other than I felt that there was something bigger than me going on in that moment. And I wanted to be a better person for them. Wonder, how I long for those moments. And thankfully, I think that's why grandparents are so happy, because they get to relive the wonder of their children once again through their children's children. But it's not only in places of beauty, it can also be in places of great sorrow. My father, as he was dying of cancer and slipping into a coma, it was a hard moment for me. I held his hand, sitting by his bedside, and I remember how much he sacrificed for me. And when he breathed his last, all I can say is time stopped in a moment of horrible beauty. Our gospel lesson this morning is a strange story. We are about halfway through the Gospel of Mark, coming very close to the end of Jesus' life. Jesus takes aside 3 disciples. Now, notice where he takes them, up on a high mountain. I've been in Israel. I've been to the Mount of Transfiguration, the place traditionally where Jesus went, and it's the highest mountain in the spot. It's nothing great, but it's high, and it's very beautiful, and it overlooks the sea. And I believe Jesus longed for some time away from his disciples in a place of beauty, the place of the greatest beauty in this area, because he needed the beauty because he was now turning his face towards Jerusalem. Because he was turning his face to the cross. Sitting around on the top of the mountain, his disciples saw something. And I think our gospel writer of Mark doesn't really know how to describe this. Words fail him in this moment. He says, Jesus was transfigured. His clothes were dazzling white, so white, says the author, that such no one on earth could bleach them. He hasn't met my mother, apparently. She can bleach anything whiter than white. But I get the feeling that his words are just an attempt to say it's beyond this world, beyond what we're trying to say. It's words that don't really capture what he can explain here. And the point here is that whatever happened, Peter, James, and John saw Jesus, I think, for who he really was in that moment. Like they were seeing Jesus for the first time. The beauty and the wonder of the mountaintop mixed with seeing Jesus overwhelmed them. And they really didn't know what to say. And then if that wasn't what the worst, all of a sudden Elijah and Moses are there. And good old bonehead Peter, who doesn't ever really know what to say, blurts out, "Rabbi, this is amazing. Let's build 3 houses. We can live here. We can come back on vacation. Wouldn't this be great?" And even the gospel writer Mark says he didn't know what he was doing because he was terrified. Terrified. The Gospel of Mark often talks about the disciples being terrified. One other example, they're sitting around, and the disciples go out in a boat. Jesus is tired, he falls asleep, and remember, they're all fishermen, and a storm comes up, and they're afraid to die. This must be quite a storm for fishermen who are used to being on the sea. And the storm comes up, and they wake him up and say, "Jesus, teacher, do you not care about us? We're going to die." And Jesus wearily rubs his eyes and says, "Peace, be still," and the storm calms. And it says, and then they were terrified after the storm calmed. On the Mount of Transfiguration, after Peter blurts out his nonsense about houses, they're terrified. And a cloud surrounds them. It just gets more and more amazing. And a voice comes out of the cloud, the same voice that they heard at Jesus' baptism. "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." It's the exact same words. Wonder changed them. Wonder changes us. Jesus is a wonder if we see him. It was April 3rd, 1968. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had gone to bed early. He had been keeping a grueling schedule of speeches and marches and was completely worn out. He is already in bed by 9 o'clock. And he was in Memphis, Tennessee, on a march to help striking sanitation workers who were laboring under horrible conditions. One of Dr. King's aide came into his room, and he said, Dr. King, there's a church, the Church of God in Christ. They meet at the Masonic Temple. They heard a rumor you were going to be there speaking to them this night. And it's full to overflowing. And the weather report is that terrible. It's severe storm warnings. People are supposed to stay home. What are you going to do? Dr. King, though exhausted, put on his clothes and said, well, if they're waiting, let's go talk. Had no time to prepare his sermon or his speech. He simply stepped into the pulpit and began rather slowly. I've listened to the whole speech so many times I can't tell you, but he starts out slowly, kind of talking naturally to the people. Seeing the people as he's there, you get the feeling that he's moved by their desire for compassion and love and freedom. And he goes on and he talks about their sufferings, and then towards the end of the speech, Dr. King gets personal. And he says that he knows their sufferings, that the FBI has had a file on him and has bugged his phones for years. He's been falsely jailed numerous times. His family got regular death threats. His house has been bombed. Thankfully, no one was home at the time. A deranged woman stabbed him so that the point of the knife went into his heart, and had he sneezed, he would have died. He knew their trials. And the last words of this speech, I think, are the most remarkable. I'd like to quote the last paragraph. Dr. King said, "Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter to me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live. Longevity has its place. I would love a long life. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountaintop, to look over, to see the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people, we will get to that promised land. And I'm happy tonight. I'm so happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing anyone. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." The next day, April 4th, 1968, at the age of 39, Dr. King was shot and killed. Wonder comes in the beauty of going to the mountaintop. From the mountaintop, we can see the promised land. We can see through that thin place, through the veil, in a place where time is thick, to a place that gives us hope, that helps us cast aside fear, so we may seek God in this troubled world. King's mountaintop was being with those people in that storm, amid their suffering. And so he went forth with a courage that feared no one, feared not violence. He was ready to die if necessary, to help others, to seek God's will. As Jesus and his disciples left that mountaintop, Jesus stepped onto the path that led to the cross, and his disciples had no clue what was coming. I still long to touch that rainbow of my youth, but perhaps even more important than the wonder of the rainbow is the fact that the wonder gives me some sort of courage. Perhaps it gives us all courage to take the step towards the cross. Our roads that lead to Calvary are different, but they all lead through the suffering of our neighbor and our willingness to suffer through and with them. So we might see the glory of the coming of the Lord in our lives, and it may change us with wonder. Amen.